Welcome everybody to the EAP Prosperous Communities meeting. Welcome to all our guests this morning, quite a few. Looking forward to these presentations. So, first item on the agenda is the apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Chair of apologies from Councillor Buckingham.
Okay, and Councillor Macaulay as well, because he's only just become the portfolio holder and I didn't have enough notice for this meeting. Minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of November. Councillors happy that I sign them as a true record? Yeah. Oh. Okay. Thank you. So first item on the substantive agenda is the Highways Maintenance Annual Plan. Who's presenting that one?
Thank you, Chair. We will present that. Forgive me, we thought SQW were first, so we've actually got that presentation teed up to go first.
If you'd like to do that one first.
Should we do that first?
Yeah.
That's okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Ian A. Church. I'm going to introduce this item. So the item is concerning the production of the first economic growth strategy for North Northamptonshire and the Council. It's a very exciting time to produce a strategy of this type. It's able to inform work on a new local transport plan, a core spatial strategy for the area. We have a devolution white paper published just before Christmas, talking about devolving powers and responsibilities and funding to local areas and strategic authorities. And this is our opportunity through the strategy to influence, to set out an agenda for growth for this area, and influence those plans and strategies. SQW, so Christine and Ross from SQW were appointed by the Council in October to produce this strategy. They've been undertaking a series of face-to-face meetings with businesses and other stakeholders, which they'll talk to you about, including students from Tresham College, people who work in businesses, so not just the senior directors of businesses, but people who work on the shop floor in sales and production. So we're really keen to have that kind of range of views. So the intention is to produce a strategy for consultation next month, but ahead of that, we're really keen to have your input into the work to date. So if I can hand you over to Ross and Christine, they'll take you through briefly some slides and facilitate a discussion.
Good morning, everybody. Ross and I will share this presentation, but hopefully you're going to drive the slides. Okay, so we'll run through the whole process, but we'll do it quite quickly. In fact, Ian's just said a lot of it, but and give you a flavour of the substance of what's coming through and some of the themes that we are focusing on. So to start, structure even, the strategy process we've worked through, who we've talked to roughly, the kinds of consultations and so on that we've done. Then Ross will talk through some perspectives on what your local economy is like. That's both according to data and it's according to what businesses and others have said to us. From that, we'll draw out some challenges and opportunities looking to the future. And we'll work through these other main themes in terms of getting towards that draft strategic framework and then priorities for action as we move forward. So a bit of process, then some content, and then the draft strategy as we look ahead. So in terms of what we set out to do with this, our brief essentially, and the instructions that we were given right at the start, was to come up with a North Northamptonshire economic growth strategy that sets out clear actions and priorities to support the growth of a greener, stronger, fairer economy over a 5-year time frame to 2030. But to do that in the context of looking beyond 2030 towards 2050 and those bigger, longer-term drivers of change. The request also was that it should be very much action-oriented, setting out things that the Council and its wider partners might wish to do in order to improve economic performance and prospects looking into the future. So it's that kind of time frame which is important for this, but very much looking towards a focus on action as well. And as Ian has said, we've tried to work through all of this in the context of actually a flurry of strategies and white papers that a new government has come up with. Some of the key ones there, the green paper on the modern industrial strategy is one we've taken particular note of, and that's pretty important in terms of a productivity agenda for the UK and where North Northamptonshire might fit within it. English Devolution white paper came out just before Christmas, as I'm sure you are fully cited on. We're ignoring large parts of that in a sense through this exercise, but obviously cited on where it might be taking the area towards. And I think the other really key one, well, they're all key, but the Get Britain Working white paper sets out a requirement for local Get Britain Working plans and thinking quite hard about employability, activity rates and so on. And all of those together, I think, provide an important part of the context for this. And what we're trying to do is to reflect those national steers in the way this exercise is moving forward. As Ian has said, though, we've also tried to ground it very much within the context of your local strategic framework, which is pretty sophisticated and there's lots of strands to it. I suppose planning policy from an economic development point of view is probably the one that leaps out first to us, but transport, community, visitor economy, climate change, skills and culture are all there. You've got a raft of strategies and plans and more are coming forward, and we are trying to nest this within them so that this is informed by those that exist and informing of those that will be produced. And so hopefully there's a coherence and synergy across that, and that's really our context for doing it. So the strategy itself is informed really by 5 underpinning features. It's here for the council as a whole. You're a big organisation in North Northamptonshire. The whole council affects economic growth in different ways, some very directly, some indirectly, but we see it as influencing the whole of that process. But it's actually for your place, not just for your organisation, which means actually we need to talk to other partners and get others involved, because you will want some of those to do some of the heavy lifting in terms of delivery, and that wider fabric's pretty important. We've tried very hard to think about North Northamptonshire's economic footprint, its economic geography, its connections to other places, its place in the UK, if you like, where it sits with the major transport infrastructure and so on, which is a major source of opportunity in economic terms. And some of that's coming through, but we think more is there to be done on it. The strategy builds very much on existing work. We've tried to not start from nothing, but to build on what you've done previously and to add value to it. And as I say, it's very much about some actions and specifics and deliverables over the next little while. So those are the core bits of it. In terms of developing it, 4 main phases: a scoping exercise where we had some initial discussions, a call for evidence to make sure that we were able to draw on the material that it already existed, and we've done that pretty diligently, I think. Then looking at the evidence base, pulling that together, working out in an evidential way what are the real characteristics of this place, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, and how do we move forward. Then into strategy development and action planning, and then into the strategy itself. And where we are now is pretty much phase 3, I think. And what we'll do now is try and talk through with you where we've got to. So some insights from the evidence, some from the consultation, and then I'll come back in terms of what that's looking like as a strategy framework.
Okay, thanks Christine. So a few perspectives on the local economy in the next slide, and as Christine said, some of these are drawn from the sort of data-driven evidence base, if you like. Some of them are from those consultations that we've had, and I'll say a bit more about those in a minute. This is the next few slides are very much a bit of a snapshot, so we're not presenting the entirety of an evidence base because it would take a long time. It's really just highlighting some key features, some key data points, some key insights from consultation which are useful to think about, and hopefully a lot of them will be things which you know already, obviously because you live here and you're embedded here, or are things which don't surprise you very much, but be good to get your thoughts on that, obviously. So to start with, the headlines for North Northamptonshire, so £8 billion worth of gross value added generated within the economy, 220-something thousand working age population, 170,000 jobs, which you might say, well, okay, you know, so what? So there's some big numbers there. I suppose the point is that this is a relatively large local economy, really. So not far off 250,000 working age population. That's reasonably substantial. It's a significant economic area. And I suspect that and partly the reason for putting that up there is that I suspect if you asked people from outside of North Northamptonshire what the scale of it was, they might expect it to be a bit smaller than that. People think of places with larger cities and things in as being larger economies in relative terms. You don't have a large city within you, but nonetheless, in aggregate, this is a significant area, and that plays into some of the themes that we'll come on to in a bit. When we've been thinking about, you know, the essential characteristics of North Northamptonshire, one of the things that stands out from it is its diversity internally and its linkages externally. So clearly that map's very familiar to you, the major towns and the smaller towns across the area. A diverse range of places, nowhere being really dominant. 3 large towns which are of similar size, and I suppose Rushden is a little bit smaller, but nonetheless some sort of medium-sized urban areas surrounded by that network of smaller places with distinct identities themselves. I think that raises some fundamental characteristics around what people identify with, around how a strategy needs to speak to Corby as much as it speaks to Angle or Wellingborough or wherever else. It probably also highlights some challenges in terms of having a dispersed population, some of the challenges around connectivity and transport and so on between urban centres, which have come out of the consultation as well. So an overarching characteristic of the area that we need to bear in mind within the strategy is that diversity within North Northamptonshire. But so are the outward linkages, whether that's southwards to Bedford and Milton Keynes, whether that's eastward to Peterborough and Cambridge, whether that's west to the West Midlands, north into Leicestershire and so on, or as part of that wider Oxford to Cambridge corridor. So all of those bigger sub-regional and regional linkages are really important to bear in mind economically and in terms of how the economy works. And whatever happens with the debate around devolution and whatever form that takes, outward linkages in all directions are going to be really important to you into the future, aren't they? In whichever way it looks in the real economy. So, what are some of the key bits of data that we might highlight when we're thinking about North Northamptonshire? Well, one is the very significant rapid growth in population that you have experienced over the past few years, and then which you will experience over the next few. And I suppose 2 things to highlight from that. One is the overall growth in population, which is significant and substantially greater than the England average. But the other is the growth in the working age population, and by working age on this we mean 16 to 64. It's not a very good definition of working age because people don't stop work at 64 anymore, but nevertheless it's a kind of a shorthand that ONS quite often use. But that substantially greater increase in the working age population than we're seeing nationally. So a significant opportunity there for North Northamptonshire. I guess the implication of that is that North Northamptonshire's economy will grow over time significantly faster than the rest of the country, because clearly you have that working population which is here. Notwithstanding that, obviously the population's ageing, but not at the same rate as elsewhere in the country, and that's an important feature in terms of how the economy responds to the needs of working families and so on. We've seen some substantial growth in total job numbers, so about 33,000 extra jobs in North Northants between 2010 and 2022. The red line at the top is the North Northamptonshire line. It's a bit lumpier than the national and the regional average, but we'd kind of expect that through sort of noise in data and so on. So I wouldn't necessarily read too much into the sort of post-pandemic slump necessarily, although we need to sort of look into that a bit more. But I guess the key takeaway is a growing base of jobs over time, faster jobs growth than the national average, which you would expect given the population growth, and an increase in businesses over time as well. So about 5,000 additional businesses in the area between 2010 and 2024. Set against that, because that's actually quite a positive picture in terms of employment and business growth, I think we're quite struck by the productivity challenge that Northamptonshire faces. So productivity in this sense measured as gross value added per every filled job within the area. Currently, productivity, so that value of GVA per filled job, is about 3/4 of the UK average. And you can see from the graph that that's deteriorated over time. If you go back to 2002 in relative terms, it was about 86% of the UK average at the start of the millennium and has deteriorated a little bit since then. Some of that might be to do with changes in the sectoral balance, relatively less manufacturing relative to other sectors and so on. But nonetheless, it's probably a challenge that needs to be addressed, especially in the context of a growing area. And when you compare it with some of Northamptonshire's neighbours, the performance isn't great. I mean, Milton Keynes is there at the top and is significantly better than some of the others, but even compared with some of the smaller areas to the bottom of that graph. I think one thing that strikes us from this is that if you look at it from the outside, it's not immediately obvious why that is. We can think of reasons why it is. But if you look at, say, Rutland, which is the next line up from Northamptonshire on the right-hand side there, it's pretty easy to explain why Rutland might have quite low productivity. It's an affluent place, but there's not a huge amount of economic activity there. Northamptonshire is a bit different. There is a lot of economic activity. There's a lot of businesses. There's a lot of stuff happening. So why isn't productivity stronger? Some of that, though, is reflected in pay and income. So the sort of the real world consequences, or the consequences of productivity as it impacts on people in reality, does reflect in pay and income. So median pay quite substantially lower than the UK average. And resident pay, i.e. the pay that's commanded by people who live in Northamptonshire, is a bit higher than that which is commanded by people who work here. So relatively low wages relative to the population. And some quite significant concentrations of relatively low household income, which links mostly to the urban areas in the map on the right-hand side. So I guess that's not surprising when you look at the productivity data. And then in respect of workforce qualifications, quite a significant deficit, especially at higher level. So substantially more people that are qualified to sort of degree level or equivalent than elsewhere in the country. The picture's improved over time, which you might expect, so that's positive, but we still have some of that deficit, and I guess some of that is then reflected in that productivity data. Now, of course, we don't have within Northamptonshire a university or university town, which would to some extent influence some of those data. But in terms of what we might want to look at, in terms of areas that need to improve, improving that workforce skills profile is likely to be quite important. You have within the area some distinctive concentrations of economic activity, some distinctive sectoral concentrations. Some of it's not particularly surprising, and some of it's, you know, what you would expect elsewhere. So the largest sector is around wholesale and retail and so on. Well, it kind of is in most places, really, because that's responsive to local demand. But a couple where there are some significant concentrations relative to the rest of the country, especially in manufacturing, and especially in transport and storage and logistics and so on, which is probably the one that is least surprising when you look at the landscape and the growth in that. To some extent, the picture's changed over the past few years. So if you look at the graph on the left-hand side there, very substantial growth in transport and storage. So as well as being a sector in which there is a significant concentration, that concentration has expanded over time. But so has accommodation and food service as well, so hospitality, tourism, things that are related to that. So have professional, scientific and technical activities, which in some ways might be associated with higher-end manufacturing and so on. So's health and social work, although you'd expect that nationally as well, given the growth in that everywhere. To some extent offset by a diminution of manufacturing employment over the medium term. When we then look at what sectors might grow into the future, which is the chart on the right-hand side, quite strong growth in areas like accommodation, food, hospitality and so on. Quite strong growth in things like information technology, health and social work as well. And some in logistics and so on too. That graph on the right-hand side, by the way, is for the South East Midlands area, not just Northamptonshire, because that's where the data is available. But we might expect that to be a bit more orientated to some of those transport and storage sectors here. Just while we finish off on some of these data points, we just wanted to show this graph and or this map, and what this shows are concentrations of innovative business activity as gathered by Department of Science, Innovation and Trade, i.e. UK government, from some analysis that they commissioned about sort of 9 months ago or so. And what they tried to do was use official data plus some scraping from the web and so on to identify where there might be concentrations of particular innovative high-value clusters and so on. And the reason for showing it is partly just to show what they found, but also just to highlight what's not there, which kind of surprises us a bit. So they identify, for instance, a kind of concentration of advanced manufacturing around Kettering and the western part of the area. That's not surprising. We might expect that. They've highlighted a couple of areas that are really focused around Northampton, but sort of feed into Northamptonshire around agency market, which is basically comms and PR, and sort of social science and management, which I suspect is associated with the university. And then there's this cluster around chemicals and materials, which is sort of around Wellingborough, Kettering, out to Corby. Maybe that's not too surprising either. But there are some things that aren't on there. So what about innovation and technology in logistics, for instance, which there would be some. We might expect to see some of that. What about things associated with clean technologies, energy, and so on? That would be interesting to explore. What about innovation in the wider economy more broadly that might not be associated with some of these specific sectors? And I guess part of the conclusion that some of this leads us to is that probably there's quite a lot of activity that's happening in Northamptonshire, which is maybe a bit below the radar, maybe not being picked up on a national scale. Maybe there's something about how Northants shouts about some of those things and promotes itself as well. And that's quite interesting to feed into the strategy. So we've also spoken to quite a few people, and we've had a number of different channels of consultation. We've spoken to a number of businesses on a one-to-one basis. We've spoken to Northamptonshire Business Forum 3 times now at various different meetings. We've spoken to social enterprise related organisations as well. From Northamptonshire Business Forum, they've done some further consultation on our behalf with some smaller businesses, especially in the kind of hospitality sector and so on. As Ian mentioned at the start, we've run 2 focus groups, one with a group of students at Tresham College in Corby, which was last Friday, another with a group of employees at a manufacturing business to get their perspective from that group. We've got a series of further business consultations which is currently underway, so we're doing those now, and we will have 2 bigger workshops later on this month, and we'll highlight the dates for those at the end. So there's consultation that's happened and there's stuff that's going on, but we've tried to get quite a broad range of perspectives. So what have people said? Well, there has been a view from business consultees that the economy feels quite buoyant in terms of investor interest, commercial demand for space and so on. That's reinforced by some of the data that I highlighted earlier around jobs, enterprise and so on. But bear in mind some of those low productivity figures, which we've talked to some businesses about as well. We've had some quite positive views of North Northamptonshire. I suppose two things come out from that especially. One around what's the quality of life offer here in terms of the ability to balance access to countryside with access to opportunity, the environmental and heritage offer, a good place to live and work, and a few people have talked about that. There's been some positive feedback around the existence of business and community networks, business networks in particular, and how that offers some scope for collaborative working, in a sense that there aren't it's not dominated by, okay, it may not be dominated by big firms that dominate the supply chain, but at the same time, it's kind of not, networks aren't dominated by big egos. I think that was partly the feedback. That's not universal, because some businesses have talked about fragmentation as well, which I think is something that we also need to bear in mind. Aside from that, a number of consultees, not just from business but from education and so on as well, have talked about some of the quite significant deprivation challenges that the area has. We were quite struck, I think, by the comments of one respondent who was relatively new to Northamptonshire, working here now, but wasn't originally from here, and had spent a lot of his working life in the north of England, sort of Yorkshire and so on, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, etc. And his observation was that some of the concentrations of disadvantage and deprivation were as significant in Northamptonshire as those that he had been used to where he had been previously. And he was surprised by that. That wasn't what he was expecting. And I suspect that might go back to some of the under-the-radar things, that maybe some of the challenges for the area aren't reflected on that national scale as well. Obviously, all of that's really important in terms of the workforce skills deficits that we talked about before, but also in that context of housing growth and how new and existing communities are integrated and so on. Consultees reinforced the point we made before about local distinctiveness and specificity, and making sure that we recognise that, and the complexity of travel patterns and so on across the area, those outward connections and so on. And some quite useful feedback there on the nature of the strategy, and making sure and emphasising the point that it needs to focus on practical actions and so on, which is kind of our next task. And then just finally, some slightly different perspectives from those workshops, those focus groups that we had with students and employees, some of which reinforce what we've said, but some slightly different things that people have said as well. So I think there was a recognition that actually there's jobs market's not bad, I think was the perspective. You know, there are quite a lot of jobs that are out there, but some concerns about the quality of the jobs in their estimation and what they think they might be able to access. I think within that, a sort of quite negative view, and this isn't scientific, this is from two focus groups, so it's not a scientific poll, if you like, but a sense that maybe the opportunities that might be present in some of those large-scale transport and logistics operations weren't the ones that they would most desire. Now, some of that might be a real reflection on the opportunities. Some of it might be a mismatch in terms of how some of those opportunities are communicated by business themselves, and there's probably something to unpack there. A concern that we might expect around the sort of long-term structural changes to high streets, town centres and so on, which is clearly a national market issue, isn't it, as well? But there was quite a bit of recognition of positive regeneration in Corby. And that was very much a Corby point, actually, that came out. Quite a lot talked about the willingness to travel to work, travel to learn. So people from Kettering being willing to travel to Corby, willing to travel to Wellingborough, willing to travel out of Northamptonshire to Northampton and elsewhere, recognising that sort of those inward and outward connections. But some quite significant public transport challenges that were highlighted, and public transport challenges have been highlighted by everybody as a kind of a dominant theme running through it. And I suppose as well, this point about a limited reason to travel between the towns, and a sense that they're all different and have a different identity, but possibly offer a slightly different mix of the same thing. And is there a sense in which the towns collectively could be more than the sum of their parts, but that's not quite being realised yet? I think that was the point. Housing affordability highlighted as an issue. But I think we do come back to this point, this quite positive point at the end around a sort of pride in the community, a sense of community spirits and positive views of that, which probably associates more with the specific local town or community than it does with the area as a whole, but nonetheless is an important thing to hang on to. So a bit of a snapshot, and you'll have your views on how far some of those points resonate with you and whether you recognise them or whether you think we're missing things from that. We've tried to draw that together to think about some themes and characteristics that we might bring out for North Northamptonshire. So if we were describing North Northamptonshire and we wanted to think of some words that we might use, what might we use? And these are some that we came up with, and you can see them on there, so I won't go through all of them, but some that really sort of probably stand out. Welcoming new development while retaining the essence of place. That's probably quite important. Somewhere that's, and associated with that, a place where of communities which are quite resilient and cohesive, but are also evolving with the times and are willing to evolve. There's a sort of positivity about some of that, links with the distinctiveness of place and so on. Something about a place which, despite affordability challenges, as came out of consultation, is nevertheless relatively affordable relative to some other parts of the country, and potentially a place for, if you like, hard-working families, opportunity to work and earn from income as well as from wealth and so on, that's quite important. But then we sort of keep coming back to this point about things being under the radar as a place and strengths perhaps not being recognised as much as they should be, and maybe some of the challenges not being picked up by the places that might have control of funding and so on as well. So those are some themes, and we can talk about that a bit more perhaps later. But just moving on to what we've done with all of that and how we've started to translate that into a framework for the strategy.
Okay, so in terms of where I started, what Ross has just talked through effectively takes us to the end of phase 2 of this process, and from that we are literally getting into the strategic framework and actions and so on itself. And this is very much still live. The ink is not dry on this, and the ink might be replaced and kicked around over the next few weeks. So these are some initial thoughts on where we think we're probably heading. The component parts, so what will this document look like? The key principles will be there, the 5 I went through at the start. The context that Ross has just talked through will be there, probably in a boiled down form, but I mean that is the backdrop to all of this and starts to form the rationale for it. Then the strategy itself will be defined around three more P's, pillars, priorities and projects. The pillars are designed to be simple, easily communicable and so on, and they are focused on people, business and place. The priorities then start to be some specific things that need to happen in relation to each of those 3. And then projects are much more getting things done, making things happen on the ground, and actually what you will do with this document at the end of it. So that's broadly the structure. If we go into that, it will look something like this. So 3 pillars, the priorities cutting across those, and then projects dropping out. That will be sandwiched between a statement of vision, which will link into your wider corporate visions and so on, and then at the back end, a delivery plan and monitoring framework so that you can know how it's going and how much process you're making. So as it stands at the moment, what we think the priorities should be, subject to the workshops that still need to happen and feedback from yourselves and others over the next few weeks, are essentially these. And we've tried to boil this right down so that it's not too complicated, but basically 3 priorities per pillar. And I think these all pick up some of the themes Ross talked about. So in relation to business, there's something around promoting North Northamptonshire, recognising that there's some big opportunities and ambitions within it and of particular relevance to business audiences. Innovation and business growth is something I think we think is an area that could be pushed forward a little bit. There are things happening, but the DCIT work missed quite a lot of it, and actually could more be done with that, particularly I think around some of the sectors that are investing in the place and doing interesting things. So can we do something around the innovation agenda as we look over the next 5 years? Net zero and digital opportunities is going to be critical. I think actually some of the businesses you've got are pretty hot on some of that. I suspect the question is, to what extent does that actually work down into the smaller business base as well as some of those larger firms? And should we be focusing a bit more on encouraging that journey to net zero carbon, whatever the timing of it is, and that seems to flip and flop at the moment. We need to get there, that's clear. And actually, can Northants be at the head of the curve on that? In terms of people, access to learning and progression in work we think is pretty important. Recognising opportunities and changing perceptions and retaining and attracting talent. Just to say a word or two on these, the opportunities one, the middle bullet, we think the opportunities are probably greater than some of your residents realise exist. So there's a sort of imbalance in terms of, actually, if you go and talk to the firms and look at what they're doing, there's some quite exciting things happening, but actually those students that Ross talked to, they weren't very cited on that. And should those two things be linked a bit better so that opportunities for progression, learning and so on can be accelerated? And then finally on place, the three themes here are around connectivity within Northants and just helping the place function better in economic terms, place building, and then an outward-facing promotional piece as well. I think the place building one is a real opportunity and actually imperative. You've got some established communities, obviously you have different ones though, and there's a lot of development happening around the edges of those. And actually, to what extent are those new developments becoming part of the established place and it becoming one coherent sort of functioning town or village or whatever it is? And how do you build economic potential around that? And we think that's quite important. So it's those 9, and they need to be kicked around, they need inputs, they need to be tightened up, and then what we need to do is to try and identify the actual interventions that will flow from them, and that effectively is our job for the next couple of months. So, next steps. A consultation process is continuing. That's actually, some of that's the back end of phase 2, but it's moving into phase 3 and 4 as well. The 2 big stakeholder workshops that we're working towards now on the 30th of January, so that's next week, focus on those big strategic themes, and we want a pretty thorough discussion around that, and let's literally see whether we've got them right, try and tighten them up as best we can. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, getting more focused on the detail and implementation priorities. Timing-wise, we want a draft strategy for mid-February or thereabouts. Then a consultation process will happen for a few weeks. And the aim at the moment is to try and finish all of this by the end of March so that you've got a plan. You then need to deliver it, which is the hard bit. But hopefully it'll be in place and actually should be helpful for the council, not just in terms of delivering it, but also in terms of those bigger government things that are going on. Industrial strategy, devolution white paper, Get Britain Working plan, all of that we hope this will feed into. But that's our presentation, so very happy to have any comments or questions, and over to you.
Okay, thanks for that. I knew I'd get at least 2. Let's start with Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I just want to mention I'm a legacy councillor. There's a relevance to that, just in relation to people. You wouldn't necessarily know that, which means I've been involved with this kind of thing for a long time. So I just want to make some comments, Chair, in relation to the presentation. Not necessarily questions, but just some comments. I think the reason I mentioned about the legacy is because I was from the old East Northants area, which was down the bottom, and I think one of the issues we had down there, Chair, were two main issues. One was a lot of outward employment. We had about 70% employment going off to Northampton, which we were trying to reduce and actually have retain. And I'd just be interested in comments of how this moved forward in relation to sustainability and actually to you know, encourage a way that it is North Northamptonshire and those close linked to Northampton, as in the bottom end, or even necessarily the catchment with improvements to the network, that we actually retain people locally, because that concerns me. So it concerns me greatly, and has done for many years, because we haven't managed to bottom that one out. The other issue is about skills base. Again, there's been a big issue in relation to skills, certainly in the bottom end of North Northants, and that kind of links to your point about deprivation. I think there is certainly some evidence, Chair, that there's the history of the sudden disappearance of the shoe and boot industry, and a lot of history in relation to families working and retaining within that area, and that industry suddenly disappears. To some extent, I think there's evidence over the years that skill base wasn't replaced, because obviously the weakness of not having a university and the best education area in relation to uplifting those skills. And I think the other concern there, Chair, in relation to all of that is obviously the high prominence of the logistics. I'm obviously aware of the CEMEP industry plan and the good networks this area has, but that could also be seen as a concern for me, that have we got a replacement in relation to the skills and diversity of jobs, rather than just relying on we're a good area for networks, we carry on building that, but if the bottom, or when the bottom falls out of that, again, where does the skills and where does the diversity of jobs? And you know, the old legacy councils came to an end just as, you know, we were big lot of work going into that, of actually in relation to all the house building you mentioned that's going on. Certainly where that one, my opening part, as in retaining those people locally. You know, if you're going to have the housing, have local jobs as well, and actually have that investment in the economy, not let everybody drive off to Northampton or out of the area every time, but actually also improving that diversity of job choice as well, Chair. So if you're talking about sustainability, it's real sustainability. And I think that is somewhere that we haven't bottomed out yet in relation to our planning, and of actually retaining people locally and having a huge choice in relation to skills and opportunities. So partly, mainly comment there, Chair, but I mean, if obviously they want to but comments on my part, so thank you.
Did you want to come back on that, or we just carry on?
Can I just pick up on the point that you made about logistics and dominance of logistics and so on, because there was a really important point actually that was made, that reflects what you've just said, that was made a while ago about risks associated with that, you know, in the sense that it's an industry that's grown sort of substantially in recent years, but, you know, what will be the impact of automation and various other things on the industry, what happens if things move, and reinforcing that point around the diversity within the economy. And that's really important, isn't it? Having I suppose the line is something like a diverse economy that offers lots of different opportunities for high value employment. That's kind of what we probably want to get to, isn't it? But I think that's a really important point, which perhaps we didn't capture in the data analysis as much as we ought to reflect back. But I think that's really important.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was chairman of the Joint Planning Committee for North Northamptonshire, which in 2016 produced the current Joint Core Strategy, which is just about to be replaced, obviously. During the several years we worked on that, one of the things that became very apparent, and which you seem to have picked up obliquely, was the similarity between many of the towns in North Northamptonshire and the Yorkshire mining towns. There's a good reason for that. Much of the south of the area, North Northamptonshire, was a single industry community. Like the mining towns, there was just one type of job you could get there, working in the boot and shoe industry. If you went back 100 years, best part of half the shoes in the whole world were made in the south of our area. And there were, at one point, something like 120 shoe factories in the south. I think there's 4 left. They all went to, first of all, some of them went to Poland, then the majority went to China, And when I say went, I mean that they unscrewed the machines from the floor, put them in 40-foot containers, and they shipped them to China, screwed them in, and got someone else working for a tenth the wage doing exactly the same job. Now, this is the history which has predicated the current situation here. When the boot and shoe industry dominated this area, there was no need for high-tech skills, and there was a culture that you left school as early as you could and went into the shoe industry. That was what everybody assumed that you would do, and that culture has not changed much. The result of that is low educational standards, acceptance of low educational standards, and a community which was not attractive to high-tech industry because it had low educational standards. So you have a vicious circle. For a long time I've been campaigning to get a university campus in North Northamptonshire to try and break this culture, this vicious circle, but we've not managed to get any progress so far. Now, this leads to other complications. As my colleague said, there is a major out-commuting issue here. When we checked, I think at the time it was 65% of the working age population out-commuted, which is a ridiculously high figure, far higher than anywhere else. And that in turn came about because when the boot and shoe industry disappeared, there wasn't anything to replace it. Now in Corby, you had the steel industry went, and then massive investment to replace it. That did not happen in the south with the boot and shoe industry. Because it was 120 companies rather than just one, it didn't attract the same level of public sector investment to try and solve the problem. As a result, it went, if you like, underneath the radar, which in turn led to the massive out-commuting, which in turn leads to overloading of the strategic roads because people are trying to get out, because we've lost the train system as well. If you went back before the Beeching cuts, I believe there were 7 different railways went through this area. 1 now, and there's only a few stations. We've got the largest town in the country without a railway station by quite a margin, not even close, the next one. And as a result, the roads are heavily overloaded, which in turn means that they're breaking up regularly, and our highways maintenance budget is probably well above the average for a comparable authority because of this. It all flows from the same sequence of events in the 1980s and 1990s. Now, what the attempt the best attempt that was made to deal with this was to allocate employment land. But boom, makes sense. Unfortunately, the employment land was largely gobbled up by the sheds, which made things worse. It was very easy to give a planning application for a 20-acre shed rather than deal with the complexities of lots of small units and access roads and all of the utilities that have to go with it. So it became the easy solution. The problem with the logistics sheds is, first of all, they don't employ many people per acre. Secondly, the quality of jobs, in other words, the average pay is low. And thirdly, those jobs are being automated out of existence. So we're ending up with sheds that aren't going to employ many people, and they're not going to be well paid either, which means there's a lack of income coming into the area, which gives you another vicious circle because there's less money for the workers to spend locally. Now, that adds to the earlier problem. Because we're so attractive for logistics, it means we've got a lot of heavy goods vehicles going through our area. That in turn, because of the fourth power issue of axle weight, means that the roads are broken up even further. So the poor guy who's got the portfolio for highways and transport has got an enviable problem of just managed decline in terms of the quality of the roads. Hence, we have a constant series of potholes, vast numbers of them, some of them quite serious, breaking up the roads and leading to damage to vehicles and bad headlines. Now, all of this is a series of interlocking vicious circles, and we've got to break out of it somehow. Now, the sheds are here, nothing we can do about it, but at least we should discourage further ones, We should try and make it more conducive to the local community, e.g. by putting in a requirement that if you build a shed, it's got to have solar panels on the roof instead of putting them in farmland. I mean, that's an easy, quick win, I would have thought. And it would make it more attractive, perhaps, for alternative industries to come here, because we've just added an extra cost to the logistics industry. I mean, it's a small incremental increase, but it's better than nothing. It's a start. It's a direction we should be heading in. Now, we tried very hard to get high-tech industries to come to the area. I made a personal effort. I've set up several high-tech companies in the area personally. We tried to get, in particular with the Rushton East Sustainable Urban Extension, a block of land with high-tech industry. That was in the original plans, and we allocated land, and we said that there had to be at least as many jobs as there were houses built there. The latest plans coming forward are gobbling up most of the employment land with a single large shed, which absolutely encapsulates the problem right in front of our eyes. And we don't have any policy mechanism to oppose that. The current policy structure encourages it. So our strategy for the future should be to improve the quality of the jobs, to reduce the level of out-commuting by having jobs that are attractive to people in the area, and to cut the growth rate in transport on the roads by improving the public transport network. Now, at the moment, if you want to go from Rushton to Corby by bus, you can't do it, basically, because the bus connections are so slow that you can't do it as a commute very easily. I had one sad case of someone come to me at a clinic, at a surgery, and it was a mother whose son had got a place at Technical College at Corby while living in Rushton, had to give up the place because the commute was just not possible for someone in their teens, just not possible. The trouble is, once again, you go back to the vicious circles, there isn't enough demand for the bus companies to put on a London-level style of public bus transport, and there won't be, because without the demand, there won't be the services, and without the services, there won't be a demand. There are small things that we could do to improve the situation. If you go back to the 2016 Joint Core Strategy, it had a policy requiring the local authority to investigate opening a railway station for Rushton. You've got a large community there, 40-odd thousand, no railway station. There's a main line that goes alongside that, right next to it, and there's a disused station there, closed during the beaching era. All that's needed is to reopen that station. That would then solve a lot of problems, because it's very close to the A45, which is one of the most overloaded trunk roads in the area. It would take some of the commuter traffic off the A45, but additionally, it would bring additional spending power into the area, because it's only about half a mile from Rushton Lakes, which is our biggest development in the last 5 years, 10 years in the area, and which is highly attractive to outsiders, where people come 40, 50, 60 miles to attend Rushton Lakes. If there was a railway station that was just on its doorstep with a shuttle bus from there to Rushton Lakes, you'd get more people coming in, and you could discourage some of the people who come by car from using their cars. So that would take some of the load off the roads. So there's a series of things that we can do that will make a big improvement in the local economy and in the local community to reverse some of the bad things that have happened over the last 40 years because of the collapse of, first of all, the steel industry, and then at the same time in the slow motion collapse of the boot and shoe industry, which employed just about everybody who was in manufacturing in the southern half of the unitary. Sorry I've gone on a lot, Mr. Chairman, but there was a lot to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I was just going to pick up on a couple of comments from Councillor Mercer and Councillor North, because when we're talking about some of the warehouses, I remember back in 2006, 2007, when I was Mayor of Wellingborough, I opened the first one. and it was taken on by Monsoon, the clothing company, and its affiliated company, Accessorize. And bearing in mind, Wellingborough has always been predicated on the warehousing and distribution setup, employing a lot of local people, albeit at relatively low wages. These warehouses, and I'm picking up on Councillor Mercer's point here, employ virtually nobody. The actual control room is manned by 7 people. And you could probably get about 15 or 20 control rooms in this chamber. It's almost like a big cupboard, and you just key in what you want, and it all comes down with shuttles and chains and hydraulics and comes out at the bottom. And I think that was one of the problems, because you're just not employing the right number of people. Picking up on Councillor North's problem of out commuting, I think we saw this in Wellingborough to an extent as well, in that once we had the electrified rail line to London, which is about 42, 44 minutes or whatever, people were coming into Wellingborough, taking advantage of the relatively low housing costs in Wellingborough, and then commuting to work in London and the South East. And they spent a lot of their disposable income there too. And that effectively turned some of these towns into dormitory towns, because people just come back to sleep. And obviously you need to keep people, retain people to live, work and play in the areas in which they live. What else have I made? Another couple of notes here. So yeah, well, basically we do need to, it's easier said than done, but we do need to attract higher quality jobs and companies which would lead to higher wages, more disposable income to spend locally, and that might then affect for the better the retail offering that we get, because most of our towns are struggling. And I think partly, well mainly these days, companies like Amazon and the internet generally have taken over from high street shops, and it's a shame, because people, they get all the advice and the technical support when they're buying an expensive item from the shops that are here still, and then they go and buy it cheaper on the internet, which really defeats the object. So I think Amazon has a lot to answer for, but the challenge is trying to attract people and companies to live, work and play in the area and commute less. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Malcolm, did you have anything to say?
I think I would really just echo the comments of my other 3 fellow councillors, actually. The big fear I have is that this county has always been regarded as a low-income economy, and I think people have accepted that over the years, and that makes it even harder to break out than it actually should be. I don't know whether that's throughout the country. I also think that whilst it's affected the whole country, I just wonder what the pandemic did for Northamptonshire. It certainly switched its shopping focuses, and I think that is a lesson we could perhaps learn from some of the other areas around us that are actually thriving better than we are.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know whether you want to come back on any of that's been said before I say anything.
Thank you for all those comments. We've written a lot of notes and we will go away and think about them quite hard, but I think you've raised some really good points. Just one thing I would sort of say in response, and it goes back to the data that Ross showed. Northamptonshire's done really well in jobs creation, actually. I mean, that's what the data, the ONS official data says, which doesn't mean that's quite how it feels locally, and that's the difference, the difference between those two things is something we need to get to the bottom of. The other bit of data that does sit much more straightforwardly with your comments was the one around the productivity of the local economy, which isn't good. But jobs, there's a lot of jobs. So it's the mismatch between those two things. And I think going back to the priorities that we're starting to define, I was just looking at our list whilst you were talking, and we've got in there the point about connecting Northants sustainably across the different towns in particular, and actually can we make it more coherent as an economic place around that. So hopefully we can do something with that. And I think the other one that hopefully we can use to respond to some of your comments is around actually the importance of innovation and business growth within the area, because I think from both the evidence and your feedback, that seems to me to be the big missing bit of the jigsaw. It's interesting to think about things like the boot and shoe industry, which goes some way back now, but there's other areas that have had that sector in a very big way and moved on to do other things. The one I know quite well is around Norwich, which was similarly big in footwear and shoes, and I think that economy has moved on, and perhaps we need to bring some lessons from Norwich and Norfolk in terms of some of this. Maybe it's a different bit of the sector, but I think it's an interesting parallel.
Andy?
I welcome your comments. Why we ended up in the situation we are now is historic, obviously, but it's very noticeable that in other areas they didn't have the same, if you like, collapse of earnings that we've suffered with low, as you pointed out, low productivity, low wages. It didn't matter when it was the boot and shoe industry because it was incredibly local. And by that I mean that the factories were actually quite often in the high street. I'm not joking, actually in the high street, and people would come out of the factory and do their shopping next door, and it meant that they didn't have to pay to commute to anywhere else to do their shopping. They could walk to the shop in 2 minutes. It was a very, very integrated local economy. But when you take away the boot and shoe industry, boom, boom, boom.
Yep.
There were 4 completely independent department stores in Rushden 20 years ago. They were genuine department stores, decent size ones, decent turnover. Some of them were quite impressive in size, all gone, because they relied upon the boot and shoe workers coming out of the factories during their lunch break and going into the department store next door, buying something and then going back again. When you lost this integration of the factories and the supporting industries and the department stores, everything started to crumble. In other areas where you had a single industry town, I don't believe they had that same integration in the high street. You could actually see a giant factory with a small front between a Boots and, say, a Woolworths. It was something that you just don't get anywhere else. And the fact that there were 4 independent department stores, now all defunct, in one small town, shows you how the local economy was local. But when you take away the employment, the main manufacturing aspect of it, the entire business model crumbles.
Okay. Yeah, and we need to respond to that through the strategy, don't we? I mean, it's precisely that interconnectivity between different parts of the economy, where people work, how you provide sites, I still think the innovation side of it linked to enterprise. And again, we've seen an increase in business stock, so there's something to work with. It's just trying to get to grips with it, I think. But hopefully we can do something with that.
I think the key to it is some sort of university college, campus, or something within the area, because when you have a higher education facility, it acts as fertiliser, it's pollen, if you like, for local high-tech industries, and it, over a period of 10 or 20 years, will gradually increase the quality of local jobs, and that in turn will be a virtuous circle, gradually increasing everything better. And the key to it, in my opinion, in the medium to long term, is getting some sort of campus in the area.
Okay. For my 2 penneth, the presentation was really good. It's hit a lot of the stuff that's I think in the back of all our minds. It's actually brought it to the fore. What it's highlighted for me is we've got an excellent infrastructure here, transport links, which is a double-edged sword for us. It's brought in inward investment. I know it's in the billions that we've had, which is highlighted from what you've said, but it also it allows for logistics, etc., but it also allows for commuting. So we've got Peterborough, we've got Cambridge, we've got Leicester, where people can live here, work there. We've got the rail network, which is a very good link down to London. And who remembers North Londonshire adverts for the housing, where we physically advertised housing, well, Corby did, for people to move out of London, come and live in Corby and travel down on the train. So we've had it in our history that we've encouraged people to move into the area but not work in the area. And I think that's where we've got to start reversing it and say, actually, we are a good place to work as well, and if we can get a university campus or a campus here as well to actually encourage people to stay once they go to university. One of my daughters lives at home, one doesn't after university. So we're losing a lot of people who've gone to university. They're not coming back because there's not necessarily the kind of jobs that they've done at university, or they've lived in university for 3-4 years and have got used to living there and have stayed there. So I think that's your challenge, is in the strategy to pull all that together. One last word from Andy and then we'll move on.
Support what the chairman has just said. If you went back about 15 years, you could have found advertisements on the London Underground about London Stan. They were advertisements to people to move to Corby and our other towns and work down in London. That was actually advertised on the London Underground. So there were conscious decisions taken that took us in the wrong direction, exactly as the chairman was saying.
Are there any other comments from Malcolm?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that the problem that Wellingborough has now is that the fact the electrification of the railway lines stopped at Kettering, because now you cannot commute north from Wellingborough without changing at Kettering or somewhere further up the track. It's simply impossible. You can't get a direct train to Leicester to commute, for example, or anything like that. And that has had a big effect, I've found, talking to some of my residents.
Okay. Any other comments from officers or visitors? No? Okay, thank you for the presentation. It was really good, thank you. Okay, yeah. So, we'll go back to item 3 on the agenda then, the Highways Annual Plan. And you're welcome to stay for the rest of the thing, or you can leave, it's up to you.
Chairman,
Okay,
thank you very much. So I'm Graham Kane, I'm the Assistant Director for Highways, Waste and Growth. So members of this panel may remember that we came about this time last year to give an introduction to the draft Highways Annual Plan. And as the name suggests, this is something that we develop every year. And it lays out how we intend to maintain the highways network over the next year within the budgets that we have available. I'll let Jonathan introduce himself, then I'll do a bit more summary of the presentation. So Jonathan has joined us recently, and you may well not have met him yet. So do you want to introduce yourself quickly, Jonathan, and explain what you do?
Hi there, members. My name is Jonathan Pearson. I am the Head of Highways Delivery for North Northamptonshire Council. You may well
Sorry, can you put the mic on so that people can hear on the live feed?
For some reason, it's not activated. Go for that.
Technology problem. Is that better? I'm Jonathan Pearson. I'm the Head of Highways Delivery for North Northamptonshire Council. Some of you may well remember Phil Beecroft. I took over from him early in December. Just a little bit of, Graham will probably give you a little bit more information, and as he alluded to, the annual plan was presented to this panel probably in March last year. This is the first time that we have produced a 3-year annual plan. So we're looking at a lot more forward-thinking plan, better visibility on the priorities that we've got, and this will give us greater flexibility in terms of what we can do when we have changing priorities, and it will help us moving forward make decisions around investment and future funding. So a lot more to see in this plan this year. We obviously are putting this forward as a draft. It's for members to look at and to comment on. But as I said, it's a flexible document. It gives better visibility. It's also the first annual plan that we have produced that is in line with the recently approved asset management strategy and policy, which was approved by Executive last week. We have colleagues here from Keir who produced the presentation, Rob, Carol and Edith Shah, and they're going to present the presentation on our behalf.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. That's absolutely perfect. And I've got nothing more to add at this point. I shall pass it straight on over to Rob, I think, who's going to do the presentation. And then very happy to take questions, obviously, at the end. So I'll hand over to Rob and I'll drive the slides.
Thank you, Graham and Jonathan. Quick introduction. I'm Robert Carroll and I'm the Operations Manager for Keir Transportation, and I oversight the highways maintenance contract for Northamptonshire Council. So asset management, just some figures on the board there, roughly between sort of roads and footways, around 3,800 kilometres. Those assets are inspected at a certain frequency depending on hierarchy of each location. It could be monthly, 3-monthly, 6-monthly, annually, etc. 814 structures. We also maintain nearly 1,200 kilometres of rights-of-way network. I will go into the rights-of-way a little bit further on in the presentation. But in order to, and what Jonathan just mentioned there around the asset management strategy, we use the holistic evaluation assessment tool HEAT, which identifies sort of carriageway, footway and structure treatment priorities going forward. But in early 2025, we're looking at developing that system to look at ITS, which is traffic signal assets that we have there out on the network, and drainage assets. So we're using intelligence to drive the asset management priorities. Specific asset management plans are now in place for all key assets, and these are reviewed annually. And in terms of inspections for bridges, general bridge inspections are carried out once every 2 years, and then there's more detailed principal inspections which are carried out every 6. Professional services, so we have road safety team, which they essentially look at all the road safety data, collision reporting, red route, and there's sort of a group which involve officers from NNC and the police. We design highway maintenance projects, so that's everything from carriageways, ITS, traffic signal schemes, through to structures. And as part of that, sort of professional services that we provide as geotechnical environmental surveys for protected species, for example. We carry out technical audits on works to highways by others, so Section 278 and Section 38 works for developers. And as part of that process, when they have been approved and are on site, we then provide a service to inspect those construction projects to make sure they're being constructed to the approved design and within specification. Review of speed limits and road safety behavioural change. So there's a lot of work that goes in annually to, one, review the network, but also educate certain groups within the communities around road safety. And changes to traffic regulation orders and parking reviews. So minor improvements, so the local transport plan, so essentially each year we're going through the process of assessing what projects have been highlighted for review and taken forward, and then they go through their process and approval through the council. The list that you can see, I'm not going to go through every single scheme that's in this presentation. I will sort of just pick out some highlights. But the list on the screen in front of you there is what we are planning to deliver. There are some sort of annual repetitive items that we go through. So community liaison officer that works within NNC Highways team, they will select and put forward projects that have been put to them by members of the public and others. There's traffic engineering minor works that are identified in year, so might not necessarily be on the plan now as those priority shifts. And changes to parking restrictions and road safety engineering schemes, again, some things that come up during the year and aren't necessarily on the plan at the moment. And in terms of traffic signal projects, so Kettering A43 Hamburger roundabout, there is some sort of separate funding that's come into the council just to reconfigure how that whole junction works to make it more efficient. There's some minor works to a crossing point. And Thrapston, Kettering Road, Bridge Street, it's just upgrading the traffic signals. A14 Junction 7, so MOVA deployment, again, that is essentially a project to look at the technology, not necessarily sort of any civils work, just to make that important junction that interacts with National Highways Network more efficient. And Kettering Windmill Avenue Eyes Road. Graham, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So these are the capital maintenance schemes, or Rob will just take you through the capital maintenance schemes in a moment, but this is the funding that enables that programme to happen. So we're looking at a 3-year plan, as Jonathan said. It's the first year that we've looked at 3 years ahead, which is really, really helpful, and we've been, pushing in that direction because it's best practice to have a longer-term programme so you can plan out your funding. The current situation at the moment is that we've only got a 1-year settlement from DFT. You'll be aware that we get the Highways Maintenance Grant from DFT every year. For the last 3 years, it's been a fixed amount. But for this year, we've had a 1-year settlement with the intention for the government to give us a longer-term settlement after their spending review in June. So we wait to see for future years. But for this coming year, 25-26, therefore, so that one second from the left, Highways budget base is the amount of revenue that we have from the council's budget to put in, so £6.1 million of revenue. We've also got the maintenance block from DFT, which has only recently been confirmed, which is the 9 million. DFT have then given us an uplift of this year as part of their commitment to increase highways expenditure and maintenance. So they give us an uplift of 3.3 million. And then we've also got the NNC contribution, which we put into the capital programme last year, which was £9 million over 3 years. So in this current year, we spent £4.5 million of additional investment in resurfacing and improving the state of the network. We've then got 3 million for 25-26, and then a remainder of 1.5 million in 26-27. So you can see the total budgets for each of those years. A couple of things to point out when you're looking at this is on the revenue line, 6.1 million, there is an uplift in the proposed budget, which is obviously going through the final process of being approved through Executive and Council at the moment. There isn't an inflationary annual increase to that revenue budget, so it was 6.1 in 24-25. If the budget's approved, it will be uplifted in 25-26 to reflect inflation, but that's not a real term increase in the budget. That's just keeping up with the inflation, obviously, on the costs of the contract and doing that maintenance activity. But that would then follow through into 26, 27, 27, 28. That 6.1 would be uplifted again, and then hopefully in future years as well. But given that's not actually officially confirmed yet, we haven't included it in these slides, but I would hope that would be the case. And then again, in 26, 27, 27, 28, we have at the moment assumed that DFT will give us the same funding as they've confirmed for this year, but that's not guaranteed yet. So we've made an assumption, but until we know that for sure, we won't obviously know exactly what we've got to play with. And obviously, if any of these numbers change, positively or negatively, as a result of those decisions still to be made, then we will have to relook at the programme and adjust things accordingly. So as Jonathan's emphasised and Rob as well, the programme is subject to change on a number of different factors, one of them being the budgets being confirmed. The other is that all of these schemes at the moment are based, as Rob says, on the intelligence that we get out of the HEAT tool. But of course, they haven't all been designed and costed yet, particularly obviously the ones later on in the 3-year plan, designed and costed, and therefore we don't know the final cost for those individual schemes. So again, if those should be higher or lower than the initial assumptions, then we would adjust the programme accordingly. One final thing I'll just point out on this slide, which you may well have already noticed, but of course, by the time we get to 27-28, the £9 million of additional capital investment that was made by Northamptonshire comes to an end. And you can see that really affecting the available budget that we have therefore. So the 27-28 capital project delivery budget, so the bottom right-hand corner, you will see how much that has dropped from, say, the 24-25 equivalent figure. So in 24-25, we had a £7.4 million capital project delivery budget. If things are based on the current assumptions, then in 27-28, that will have dropped significantly down to £1.2 million. So that would have a big impact, obviously, on the amount of works that we could deliver in that year and then going forward. So I hope that's helpful for you. Obviously, happy to take any questions on that as we go forward. But I'll pass back to Rob, I think.
Sorry, Graham. I've got one question
Of course.
On that slide.
Yeah.
The effectively 3.3 million that's on the third line, is that the one-off additional funding that the government's given, or is that?
Yes.
So, again, you've assumed that the government are going to give 3.2 extra on top of what they've normally got.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's an assumption at the moment. So to answer your first question, yes, that's the additional funding that the government have given us for this year. We are at the moment assuming that something similar will come forward in future years, but there's no guarantee of that. And again, you can see that if that 3.2 or 3.3 doesn't come forward next year or the year after, you would have to minus 3.3 off that bottom box. And obviously that would actually put us in a negative situation where we wouldn't have anything for a capital programme. In actual fact, we would need to find some other ways of netting off the fact that becomes a negative figure.
I was just questioning because you've taken off the NNC funding that we've put, but you haven't done that on those.
Correct, because again, we're not certain until we get the letter, but
have they indicated that
indications? That's a good word. Indications from DFT are that there will be some ongoing funding. Yes.
Right.
Whereas I know that in the current capital development programme for the council, that money is not there, and therefore my best assumption is that it won't be there. Whereas the indications from DFT are that there will be some ongoing additional funding, but that's to be confirmed after the spending review. Okay. Thank you.
So moving on to the capital maintenance scheme, so bridges and structures, as you can see, colour-coded from 25-26 through to 27-28, the blue, green and orangey brown. Everything in red is not necessarily is going to be delivered 28-29, it is 28-29 onwards, obviously pending budgets. So just to pull out a couple of, wherever you see phase one, that means we are having to sort of manage budgets in the programme appropriately to start projects, if you will, one to mitigate against risks, etc. So Earthland Viaduct Bridge at the top there, phase one for delivery next year for that waterproofing and resurfacing scheme. And then you'll see we then have White Mills Bridge Deck the following financial year, and then we've got phase two for the A6 viaduct the following. So there is a level of conversation and decision making where we need to look at all of the assets holistically. We can't just compare carriageway with carriageway. We need to look at carriageway and structure, drainage and traffic signals when we're putting these plans together. So carriageway, preventative maintenance, so micro-asphalt and surface dressing, colour code is the same. As you can see from the previous slide that Graham went through in terms of the forward plan and the budgets, when we get to 27-28, there isn't budget available at the moment for micro-asphalt. And then again, equally, surface dressing, there's one scheme on the programme when you come to that time of year. Carriageway surfacing and patching. So again, phase 2, you can see there, phase 1 of Stamford Road, and then phase 2 the following year. But again, 27-28 with that reduction, and you know the assumed budgets from DFT and the reduction from NNC's capital investment, it then pulls the carriageway servicing and patching schemes off of the programme at that point. Similarly for footway servicing and patching, so nothing programmed this year, but then 2 footway projects for 26-27. And drainage projects and investigation. So again, just a list of what we're planning to deliver this year, particularly around prioritisation with drainage. New issues do tend to crop up quite frequently, particularly in the winter, and sort of where the storm decides to drop its water. But again, there's the budget and the programme to deliver what we have on the screen at the moment. But we do need to look at properties, hazards to the roads when it comes to flooding events to make sure that we're putting those priorities as best as possible. Cyclical maintenance, verge mowing, so visibility to road users, especially at road junctions and crossroads. Where safety is not compromised, and where possible we'll reduce mowing in line with no mow May. So we do sort of change the programme around to make sure that, one, we are completing safety critical sites, so there will be mowing in May for that very reason. But we just need to remember it is a very small percentage of the verge network that we would be mowing at that point in time. And you can just see sort of the programme in the bottom left-hand there and how we split out the different areas. So we have parish, safety sites, the rural roads, connecting between parishes, the main roads, which are a road network, urban safety, so sort of the Corby Ring roads through from Spread Eagle Pub all the way through to Weldon and back towards Stanyon, and rights-of-way network and designated area wildflower verges. Weed killing, so carriageway, curb channel and paved areas, footway. So there are 2 treatments, April, May the 1st, and then we come back a little bit later on, July and August, to carry out the second treatment. That is in all of the parishes within North Northamptonshire. And there is a list of a road network that you can see under there in very small text, so apologies. But yeah, if you need any more information on that around sort of the specific locations, we can provide that. And vegetation, so it's a case just to be, so hedgerows, trees, to be managed. One, to make sure we're doing it at the right time of year for environmental reasons, bird nesting. But 2, to make sure that the network's open, free and safe. Gully maintenance. So we deliver a cyclical gully programme on a risk-based approach. That's to sort of enhance efficiencies. So we can focus on high-risk areas. High-risk areas are generally where we look at sort of 6-monthly programmes, or where we know sort of flood and hotspots are because of geographical water runoff, where we can assist a little bit more quickly. But the system that we use, it sort of has an algorithm that takes into fact the importance factors and the vulnerability. So speed of the roads, 60 mile an hour have a greater weight than a 30, for example. And road type is another good example where if you look at a dual carriageway national speed limit, or a roundabout, for example, where people are changing lanes, turning, again, that would have a higher rating than a straight road. And vulnerability factors, is it in a flood zone? Have we been there before on emergency response? And historic average silt levels. So what we are looking at doing, so the 25-26 gully maintenance programme at the moment isn't confirmed. We are looking at all the data now. We've had a good chunk of 2 years worth of data. We are reviewing that because there are times where if we have 100% silt level in a gully, for example, the algorithm picks that up and will say, well, that now needs to be an annual instead of a triannual. But it could be in a 20-mile-an-hour zone, 99% of the gullies around it are clear. There just happened to be a parked car, on a previous visit, and it wasn't cleansed at that point in time. But in order for us to go to that one gully, that then creates inefficiencies. So we are looking at the algorithm to make sure that we have the most efficient program as possible. Reactive and planned maintenance. So defects repaired in accordance to investigatory levels in the Highway Safety Inspection Manual and Network Management Plan, but also we take a sort of a risk-based approach on that as well. So while there are guidance within those documents, our inspectors and community stewards, when they go out to assess a defect that's either been reported or is on a planned inspection, they'll also take into account other risk-based factors, location of defect. Is it going to last 4 weeks? Do we need to do it sooner? 7 days, for example. And public rights of way, so out of the network, we inspect 20% of that network annually. So we do a full cycle every 5 years, and we work with landowners to resolve issues. So there's certain responsibilities that landowners have. So we liaise closely with our relationships with landowners to make sure that when issues do arise, that they're also playing their part in the upkeep of the network. Incident response. So in 2024, 1,714 emergencies attended, and they come into us in a manner, different manners. So it could be NNC officer, could be emergency services, or member of the public. We also do monitor sort of the council's online reporting tool to see if there's any emergencies that might have been reported via that method, or anything that could potentially be dangerous. So we do monitor that to make sure that nothing slips under the radar, and we get out there as soon as possible to inspect. For major incidents, there's variable message signs where we can get information out on what's going on and times where we might be reopening a road. We also send emails out to members, and more recently, over the past sort of 18 months, increased presence on social media to get that key information out to residents of North Northants. Where possible, so on emergencies, where possible, permanent repairs will be made. It does depend on the roads, traffic management, what time of day it is, and what material they have. But we are currently running a rate of 0.3% of the repairs that we make are temporary, and the rest are permanent. And when we do attend, we do not leave a site unsafe. So if we can't deal with the emergency, i.e. fallen tree at 3 o'clock in the morning, we will close the road to make that area safe, and then we will come back during the daylight hours to make sure to complete that work. Traffic signals, so again, just some information on the asset data on the left-hand side there. Some of the assets that we're responsible for maintaining. Variable message signs to display traffic information. All campaigns, so during December, the drink driving, etc. There's scope to put some road safety messages out there. Network Intelligence Operations Centre, so our NEOC. That's essentially a team of people that monitor the network, monitor traffic signals, road space applications, and in terms of the traffic signals, they also are responsible for around 3,000 defects per year. So that could be anything from somebody's crashed into a traffic light to the green light bulb is gone out and we need to get an engineer to replace it. And winter and severe weather. So during 23-24, so last winter season, 3,000 tonnes of salt were used, and we had 44 greater actions during that period. And I think just in contrast to some of the things we've been talking today about changing priorities through the year, as we stand at the moment, we are at 40 gritting actions, largely due to the 12-day severe weather event we had at the beginning of January. There was 23 alone during that period. So that, again, it's budgets, it's salt, it's all of that just then feeds into the annual plan. But in terms of that, we have weather forecasters that provide all year round 30-day, 15-day, and 2 to 5 day and 24-hour forecasts. So during the winter period, they are monitored continuously, 24 hours a day, by our duty managers and the provider of that service. And as part of that, decisions are made based on quite a lot of data, whether or not in line with policy as well around gritting actions. And in terms of what we are required to have on the contract, we have 4,000 tonnes of salt stored at any one time at NNC's Wellingborough depot. So we are in no danger of running out of salt. Thank you. Any questions?
Before we ask questions, please no specific potholes, because we'll be here all day otherwise. So Andy first, then Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got quite a few questions. Let's start off with a really simple one. You've got down Boundary Avenue to be in Rushden to be upgraded or resurfaced in 28-29, and you've got some other roads in Rushden much earlier. Boundary Avenue is breaking up badly. I would strongly suggest you swap it for one of the others so that it's repaired at the earliest possible time. Simple one. Right, next. Ditchford Lane Bridge is currently broken after, as I understand it, a combine harvester burst a tyre and hit the wall. And I understand you can't repair it until English Heritage give you the go-ahead. But I don't see it in any of the schedules. When will it be?
So that particular scheme comes under sort of accident and vandalism. That will be delivered in year. We now have the consent from Historic England, which was surprisingly quicker than usual. It can take up to 12 months considering the nature of the bridge. We are at the moment mobilising contractors, but because of the specific requirements within the permit to do the work from Historic England, it's lime mortar. We need to have 5 degrees and rising. We also haven't been able to retrieve the stone because of the water levels from the accident. So there's a bit of work to do, but we are looking to programme around the 2nd to 3rd week of March. So we've got the rising temperatures, and we can do that work in the better weather.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Right. Next. What happened to the HS2 money? I thought that was going to come to you, but I don't see mention of it in this report.
Through you, Chair. So obviously you're right. That was this is the northern extension of HS2, and that was cancelled by the previous government. There was a promise of funding through Network North funding, some of which we received, a small percentage of the overall amount we received in the last 2 years, and about 2 million in total, and that's been invested in doing additional work on the highways network, so it was very welcome. This government has not continued with that same approach of redistributing that funding in the same way. So I'm not making an assumption of receiving any of that funding in that way. However, we've pivoted, as the government has, and we're now listening to what they're saying around additional funding that they are looking to put into highways. So the Network North funding is not assumed in the budget, but there is an assumption that the current government will give us additional funding based on the messaging that they've been putting out.
Okay, right. Next one. Probably I missed it, but I didn't see a reference to line markings in the budget. And I've noticed that during the winter, a lot of line markings have been worn away quite severely. Can you explain to me, too close to the mic, which part of the budget the line marking work goes into?
So road markings come out of the revenue budget, and it will sit within minor works. So it's the same budget essentially as potholes, sign replacement, road stub replacement.
Okay. Right, next. I'm sure you're aware that the Chowns Mill traffic lights have gone out on a regular basis. I've heard all sorts of rumours as to why they've gone out, some of them including the activities of four-legged rodents. Is there a long-term solution proposed for that? I know it's Highways England rather than the local authority junction, but is there a long-term solution to that?
Yeah, you're quite right. It's National Highways rather than us, so it's not in our programme. Obviously, we wouldn't be working on that. That's a National Highways issue.
But they've not told you how they're going to fix it then?
No, they haven't. I'm quite happy to ask them. We meet with them regularly and talk about various strategic issues across the combined networks. So I'm quite happy to have a conversation with them about that. Yeah,
it's gone out an average of about once every 2 or 3 days recently, which is starting to get a bit worrying. Right, next one. The capital budget for 27-28, as you pointed out, is not one that I would recommend. Would you like to comment on that a bit more than you have?
Through you, Chair. Obviously, you can see the impact it has on the programme. Rob explained it. In future years, we've had to make assumptions that there won't be certain works that can go forward, so like the micro-asphalt, very reduced surface dressing schemes, no footway surfacing and patching, carriageway surfacing and patching as well. No programme for that in 27-28. So the benefit of having a 3-year programme is that we can look ahead and see the impact that future budgets would have on our programme. So there's a joint understanding of the implications of it. Obviously, I know that budgets are tight everywhere, so highways are not the only service looking for budgets, so I'm acutely aware of that, but I think it's important for us to flag the impact it has on the activities that we can undertake.
Right, well, this is a complicated one, perhaps. You're probably aware that there is a proposal for a sustainable urban extension to the east of Rushton. And currently, my understanding is that Highways England have put a stop on it until the Rushton Lakes roundabout, which is about 3 miles away from it on a different road, is upgraded. I understand the developer of the SUE is prepared to pay for upgrading that roundabout, but my understanding is that they have not managed to get permission or plans to go ahead with it. So 2,700 houses plus a roundabout upgrade are all stalled for lack of a plan. Can you give us any sort of update on that?
Through you, Chair, again, it's not directly related to the annual plan or this item, but I'm happy to say that my colleagues in Highways Development Management are engaging both with the developer and National Highways about that and reviewing the modelling. I had an update on it just yesterday, so that work is continuing. Those conversations are happening within the planning sphere and the development management sphere.
Yeah, if we can keep it to the plan, because specifics...
I'm quite happy to arrange an update outside the meeting.
Specifically, could you go through the portfolio holder?
Yeah. Could you forward that to the members of this panel and to the portfolio holder when you've got some information? That'd be really useful. Final thing that I'll mention here. At a previous meeting, I mentioned that on the continent, they seem to have roads that don't break up to the same degree in adverse weather as ours do. And I mentioned that there was quite a bit of research going on about self-repairing roads. And one of your colleagues said that they would look into it and get back to us. Well, I've not had any response. So can we put that somewhere into the plan to investigate the options for self-repairing roads? Because that would make a big difference in the 10 to 15 year time frame. And that's what a strategy should be about.
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry you didn't get a response. I thought you did get a response, actually, Councillor, about that, because I remember you asking it previously. I thought an email had been sent back to you, so apologies if you didn't receive one. Innovation is a big part of the relationship we have with Kia on the highways service, and we talk about it on a monthly basis about what innovations we can bring to the contract to bring greater efficiency, greater productivity, greater investment into the highways network. So we continually look at innovation that's available out there. We've looked at the self-healing concrete repairs that you've mentioned previously. Rob might want to give an update on that, but I just want to reassure all members that we do look at emerging technology. We're members of a number of different networks across the country, which bring innovation together, and we share ideas together to see what products and machines and equipment might enhance. Obviously, one of those things is looking at artificial intelligence and seeing how that might help, and Kira looking at seeing how that might assist, particularly with scheduling, so that we can schedule things more intelligently, more quickly, and with fewer needs for sort of human resources, if you like, so they can do something more productive on the network. So we're constantly looking at innovation, but I don't know if you've got any particular update, Rob, on self-healing surfacing.
Yeah, so I've reached out to our maintenance and innovations sort of wider team within Care Group, and it's something that they've been looking at, but the technology is so new, it's difficult to get a partner involved for them to drive it forward. So essentially two things need to happen, and it's similar with sort of graphene products. You need to have a laboratory that has all the science and the data and the knowledge around the chemical makeup, and then you need a provider, so a tarmac provider, that is willing to have that in their product. And because there's very little testing at the moment to sort of guarantee those road services, and it will take somebody to go, let's take a shot at it and see what happens. But again, it all comes down to the expense. We could trial a site, but it's where the priorities sit as well in terms of that, because it's a very, very costly exercise.
Well, can I ask that when you make any progress in that area, you send a briefing to the chair, the portfolio holder, and the members of this panel, so we're aware of the progress you're making. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the public rights of way, you mentioned that the team inspects 20% a year. How does the complaints system work? I've got quite a big footpath and bridleway network across my farm at Easton Mordit, and occasionally, if things like bridges, I know you supply and most often install or reinstall, especially where you've got damage from horses crossing them. But where you get a stile or something like that, I tend to get a call from the rights of way officer. It's normally, I think it's Sarah Curtin at Kettering. But if nobody reported that stile, and I don't go around checking every 5 minutes, how does that actually get to your attention?
So there's a number of ways. One could be landowners, yourself, for example, that might see an issue when they're out there on the land. And the online reporting tool linked to Fix My Street, similarly to reporting a highway defect, you could report rights-of-way issues on there as well. So all of that sort of asset sort of layers for rights-of-way network is embedded in that system. One thing that we are going to rejuvenise is the parish path warden scheme. So where we have people that, because you tend to have, if it's in their community, they're more likely to want to report something, get something fixed, rather than somebody who's just passing through. So, and if we have people that are out there quite often, there are another eyes and ears on the ground. So we're going to reignite that scheme, bit of a job spec, if you like, a bit of training on how to, and as well, we're also looking at sort of volunteering where, some of these low risk items can be fixed there and then by members of the parish.
Thank you for that. In fact, we've got a parish footpath officer to be elected at the parish meeting next week. I think I was about 20 years ago, but it's poacher turned gamekeeper, because I can't really criticise myself. Well, I could criticise myself, I suppose, but I do all the maintenance on the mowing and the keeping clear and the spraying off and what have you. And obviously with the Wendell Walk coming through part of my farm, I do all the, where you get overhanging branches on bridges, So I take a proactive view on that. I know some farmers don't, although I think most would be positive about it. But it's just a question of how you keep on top of some of these complaints. It would be so much easier, and I've said that to Sarah Curtin, if you get people in the next village who know who the farmer is, and we've been farming there since the 1760s, so they do know who we are. It would be so much easier to ring up and say, Tim, there's a bit of a loose rail on that stile or whatever, and that could be dealt with, but they go to the rights of way, they have to get somebody to look at it, and then it comes back to me. It's a roundabout way of doing it. But that's the way the system works. But thank you for your answers on that.
Thank you. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple, but they are very minor. Did you want me just to do them all at once? And then
Go on.
Yeah, all right. In relation, I think a couple of them maybe for Graham. Local transport plan has been mentioned. I don't recall having a new one for a long time. I just wondered where we are, whether we're still working on the old county one, or we've done. I don't remember us doing the local transport because they were quite regular. I thought that had to be every 5 years or so. So just for sort of where we are on those. On the page 8, in relation to the discussion on the capital scheme, I don't know if the email came out different, but obviously that's been an update since these papers came out, because the ones I haven't got bear no relation to the figures on the fair, and that would be helpful in relation to. In fact, there was an extra column, so that would be helpful if we could have that. So they were just two minor queries. I won't go into specifics, Chair, but the issue around Earthenborough Bridge has been very noted on the viaduct. You mentioned waterproofing, but I think you said resurfacing as well. You've got phase 1 here, so I'm just seeing, Chair, if it is a resurfacing and in relation to the issues that's been going on with the viaduct, whether it was planned and obviously which area we're looking to do. And I appreciate it's such a busy road, viaduct as well. The A6 traffic has increased considerably in recent years. And the other final one, Chair, in relation to page 11, in relation to carriageway servicing and passing, I just don't know if in the future we could have a separation on, and you may not decide it, so it may not be possible, but in relation to which actually is being resurfaced and which actually is being patched, because they're quite different. And I think what I've raised with the predecessor in relation to assets is in relation just the poor historic state, and I mean really historic state, nothing of a recent contractors, of the deterioration of the really minor, and you would have heard me mention it in these meetings before, Chair. So I'm just generally interested when it comes to patching and resurfacing, how many over a period of time we're actually getting to be able to resurface, because sort of the historic need, and how much is just patching. Because from my point of view, certainly in Rushton, there is some considerable deterioration, which has been, and as discussed before, we're talking decades of just general deterioration and lack of investment. And it's just about whether, we can have visibility of what is needed to be required in relation to which is going to patch it, or we have got an opportunity to really resurface sections that have really deteriorated and be a major program. And of course, maybe proper resurfacing and able to resurface there will sure be better than just patching up anyway in relation to the longevity of the surface, in my non-knowledge of roads and humble opinion. So that's all it was, just those four. So,
do you want to? Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. So thanks for those questions, Councillor North. So on the local transport plan, yes, we're still reliant on the existing local transport plan, which dates back to Northamptonshire County Council's development of that plan, so we still refer to that and use that. Yes, it is out of date, i.e. it's time to be upgraded. The progress for that was essentially delayed by one vesting day. I think if the county had still been there, they would have progressed with that work, but obviously they were busy preparing for vesting day and the transition in that, so they were distracted, if you like, from doing that work. But also the government, the previous government, was going to produce some updated guidance on local transport plans, which was delayed and actually never came forward, so we still haven't received that. However, it's important that we push forward with that local transport plan. All of us would like one, an updated one for all the value that it brings. So we're hoping to go out with consultation. I've just been liaising with colleagues about it this morning, actually consultation on what's called the baseline report, which is one of the first stages, which essentially is saying, excuse me for sort of summarising it crudely, but it's essentially saying these are all the sources of information and evidence that we will pull on to inform our local transport plan. Are there any that you think we have missed or we should consider? So we would list them all out and then ask through the consultation whether or not we've missed anything. And that would be the first stage for us progressing with the LTP, which we are keen to get on to do. So yes, it's a priority for the service. In terms of the numbers, you're right, the numbers have changed. That wasn't meant to be a trick or a spot the difference exercise. We just updated them in the last couple of days because, as I say, things are moving quickly. We've had that confirmation from DFT. I was liaising with DFT regarding that over the last week, so even since those slides were circulated to you, so we've updated them, and of course we can send this latest pack that we've shown today through to Pauline, and I'm sure she'll circulate it to everybody, so that's no problem, and you can have the updated one. The A6 viaduct, yes, I'm glad you've seen that on the scheme. It's one of those large schemes. Rob might want to say a bit more about what it is and the indicative costs for that. But the re-waterproofing and then the resurfacing of that bridge is significant, which is why it's one of the ones that's been split over a number of years, because it would simply use up all of, if not more than, or the majority of the budget if we did it all in 1 year, and we wouldn't be able to do anything else. So it's that significant. In terms of resurfacing and patching, we obviously, as those who spend our days maintaining the highways network, we would love a more extensive surfacing program. We would love to be able to do so much more resurfacing than obviously budgets can manage, but we understand that is the way of things, and as you say, it has been an underinvestment across the country for decades on the highways network. Northamptonshire is not unique at all in that regard. The patching that we do nowadays, even the sort of square foot patching that we do, is greatly enhanced from what used to happen in the past. So they are really decent patches, cut out, sealed, etc. So they do last. But of course, what we've all seen is that the tarmac around that patch then deteriorates. So it's rarely the actual patch that deteriorates, but it's everything around it because it needs a proper resurfacing scheme. But the budget doesn't stretch to a resurfacing scheme, so you do end up with these individual patches, which I know all of us dislike, and we would like a curb-to-curb resurfacing, but the budget simply doesn't stretch to it. But we try and do the absolute most we can with the budget we have available. I think that covered all your questions, but I wondered if you wanted to say any more about the A6, just to give a bit of a flavour of the works that are going to happen there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's A6 viaduct. It's just under 500 metres in length, which is half a kilometre, so it's a significant structure. In order to, so the waterproofing in the structure is essentially failed or perhaps failing in other places. So there are worse areas at the moment, and that's where it comes into the priority in the programme. In phase 1, we'll tackle the most significant area initially. But it's not just as simple as you plane the carriageway, you replace the waterproofing, which is attached to the concrete bridge deck. It's potentially you need to take out the curbs because you need to overlap the waterproofing underneath the footway, the bridge joints as well. Some of them, there'll be several different types of bridge joints along that structure. So it's all the managing of excavating that and how we program traffic management, Chalmers Mill roundabout, stone throw away, and how we manage that interface. There's quite a lot of planning and sort of hidden costs, if you like, because of the actual work that goes on below ground. From the recent patch that we did there, it was almost 200 mil deep in places. So you can imagine it's 110 mil nearer the curb line, and because of the camber of the road, it's very deep in the centre. So there's a lot of material to come out. In terms of indicative costs and phasing, at the moment we're sort of envisioning perhaps 5 phases, and it's in the region of £4.5 million, which just to go back to Graham's point, that would swallow up the capital budget just on one project if we were to do it in one go, which would then mean no maintenance to other footways, drainage, traffic signal schemes, etc. So it does need to sort of be managed carefully.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for those responses. Just very quickly in relation to the local transport plan. I remember, and it's only a quick response on that. I'm sure you do, Chair, and those members here as well involved. It was quite a tough call on the government if you didn't have one up to date in relation to the funding you received. I mean, the government quite strong, and the governments at the time got quite strong and forceful that if you didn't have one in place and it wasn't up to date, you would actually start not having the funding coming through. I appreciate Graham's response, but that plan must be, I remember being involved with it at the time, Chair, that must be considerably older and out of date, even with the baseline updates. There must be a serious point in relation to the government of saying around the country in plans in place, unless, of course, across the country, a lot of the plans ran out of time at the same time, and as has been said, they weren't pressing on any of them, or they're done at different times, and ours is particularly out of date. I'm just concerned, going back to the time, Chair, that there's a lot of pressure to get one in place to get the funding.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's really important that we push on and get it updated. I absolutely agree. There's a number of, what I think you're referring to is the incentive scheme. So even now, DFT, within the numbers that you see here, part of that is what they call the incentive scheme. So the original concept of it and theory, the principle of it, they enacted it as well, was that a proportion of the funding was dependent on local authorities having certain plans, policies, strategies and procedures in place. Some of those related to what Jonathan was referring to earlier, which was the asset management strategy and plan, and that's gone through executive now, and there's further strategies for us to bring forward as well. So DFT do expect us to have these particular documents and approaches in place, which is why we're very keen to get them updated and in place. They haven't confirmed going forward, they haven't confirmed the evaluation process for the incentive element of the funding. It's still there as an incentive element, so they've still included in the funding grant award letter the fact that they could withhold that funding if we don't meet the criteria. Just to reassure members, we have always met the criteria. So it wasn't applied last year. I think it was applied maybe the year before that. I've lost track a little bit, but they haven't applied that for the last 1 or 2 years. But in every year previous to that, we always achieved that criteria and threshold, and the money therefore was secured. They haven't confirmed how they're going to evaluate that going forwards. But again, I mentioned the networks that we're part of. I was part of a region, actually it was a national meeting, that one on Friday, where somebody from the DFT was there giving us an update on how it might be done in future. So we're staying close to it to make sure that we're in a good place to secure that funding.
Malcolm.
Thank you, Chairman. First one is just a minor plea, and that is online marking. Since I've started commuting to Corby on the Unitary, the one road that doesn't seem to have ever had any line markings renewed, and in fact they're now virtually invisible. For the life of me, can't think at the moment what the actual number of it is, but it's the one that comes in from the past the Spread Eagle and past the Little down effectively from the well, that should describe it. You can see it on the map. That road changes from dual carriageway to single to dual, etc. It's got some very big roundabouts on it, and effectively, it's got no line markings anywhere. It's fine in daytime. At night time, I should think a lot of people find it very dangerous. That's just one to look at, please. The second point, more serious, is the A6 roundabout in Findon. 3 years ago, I met some council officials who promised me that there was £600,000 from Section 106 money, I believe. But anyway, it had been gathered in and was earmarked for an improvement to that A6 roundabout in Findon. I said, when are we going to get a plan for it? He said, I'm just waiting for somebody to come up with a design. That was 3 years ago. I badgered subsequently. It's disappeared completely. What is happening?
So again, through you, Chair, you're absolutely right, Councillor. There is funding there from Section 106 funding. It's not in the annual plan, so it's not part of this item. But we have done some recent work on that, and I'd be quite happy to arrange a briefing for the local members to give you the updated picture on it.
Okay, if there's no other questions on the plan? No? Okay. Thank you everyone for the presentation. Okay, quickly moving on to item 5, the executive forward plan.
Chair, can I just point out that this has actually been superseded by a new plan that came out after the agenda.
Right, okay. Can we get that circulated to everybody then, please? Thank you. And then the forward list of items for this EAP. 33.
So we have one more meeting on the 5th of March, and currently housing strategy and the cultural strategy are marked to go to that meeting.
Excellent. And the housing strategy I got yesterday, so I think it was, so I'm reading that this afternoon. Okay.